Good morning. Happy Monday. My cameraman is shit again today, so I apologize about that. Enjoy the light show. I was asked to do a TLDR for my last video because apparently people don't get it. And I don't know really what a 10-minute synopsis is going to do, but maybe for those with shorter attention spans, it might help. It might help kind of clarify things. I am not saying, nor have I ever said, that you have an unrestricted right to film in governmental buildings. That would be stupid to say. It is similarly stupid to say that you have no right to film in a government building. Because as several of the cases laid out, you do have a right, not an unlimited right, but you do have a right to film in governmental buildings, specifically if there's no restriction in place on it. That was Dunn versus Fort Valley. If there's no restriction in place, then you have the right to film. Because the baseline throughout the entirety of the United States, the baseline is that you have a First Amendment right to film. That's the baseline. And the government may, in certain circumstances, be able to restrict that right to film. But if they have not restricted the right to film, then you have the right to film. So that should be, it's tautological. It should be fairly self-evident. I don't know if anybody's having a real issue grasping that. But if you're in a government building and there is no restriction on your right to film, then you have a right to film. Okay? Great. By the way, I'm not talking about trespassing. I'm not talking about disorderly conduct or anything like that. I'm talking about solely the right to film. Assuming the perfect person, being a perfect gentle person, like gentleman, gentlewoman, not getting in anyone's face, not making a scene, just recording. That's all I'm talking about. Because once you start adding in other facts and things get different and the analysis changes. So I'm just sticking with baseline facts. Now there's the next way of doing it is in a non-public forum. The first question you have to ask yourself, actually before we get there, so once we've determined there is a rule against filming, the next question we have to ask ourselves is this rule limited to this forum, or is this rule across an entirety of forums? Take, for example, U.S. versus Grace. In U.S. versus Grace, Congress passed a law restricting certain activities on Supreme Court grounds, the entirety of the Supreme Court grounds. Now, most of the Supreme Court grounds is unquestionably a non-public forum. But some of the Supreme Court grounds are sidewalks that border the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court looked at it in a traditional public forum analysis, and they said, you've got to have a compelling, an important government interest, has to be narrowly tailored to achieve that important government interest. Reasonable time, place, and manner restriction, etc. So because a part of that forum that the rule was affected a traditional public forum, that's the test they used, even though the rest of the Supreme Court was a non-public forum. Now, if it went even further than that, if it was just a blanket ban on something, period, regardless of where you are, like, for example, a wiretapping law that, prevented you from recording interactions with the police, then you might not even get into a public forum analysis or a forum analysis period, depending on the circuit you're in. There might just be, especially in the First Circuit, it's just going to be intermediate scrutiny, subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, yada, yada. So after we determine that there is a restriction, if there is a restriction, then we have to determine whether or not we're looking at it as a forum analysis or some other analysis. That's the second step. The third step, if we have determined it is in fact a forum analysis, then we have to determine what kind of forum we're looking at. Is this a traditional public forum? Is it a designated public forum where the government has said, okay, this is a free speech zone, you all get to do free speech here? Is it a limited public forum and where the government says you can do some kinds of, we have a billboard over here that you could put up notices on, but that's it. Or you can hand out flyers in here, but you can't solicit or whatever. If the government has allowed certain limited amounts of speech, that'd be a limited public forum. Or a non-public forum would be where the government has not allowed any speech, where they've kept it closed. They've kept it solely for the purpose it was intended for. So those are questions you have to ask yourself. So you have to determine what kind of forum you're looking at. And then once you've determined the kind of forum, then you have to ask yourself, does the restriction meet the requirements of the test for that forum? And even a non-public forum, there is a possibility that the test won't pass the constitutional scrutiny. For example, in Lee versus the International Society for Christian Consciousness, or vice versa, I forget which way it goes. One of them said that they can't solicit, but the other one said that they can, in fact, leaflet. A restriction against leafleting did not pass constitutional scrutiny because that kind of behavior wasn't out of place. It didn't affect the flow of traffic. You could still operate an airport perfectly fine with people leafleting there. So even if it's a non-public forum, the question the court's going to ask is this restriction reasonable in light of the forum that it is? Like, for example, a military base. A military base is a non-public forum. The whole military base is a non-public forum. But let's say you go to an air show on the military base and you want to record that air show. Everybody else is recording it, but for some reason they're like, you can't record this air show. For some reason, I don't know. Well, is that constitutional? Can they do that? And it's probably not going to pass the rational basis review or the reasonableness test, because what you do at an air show is you take pictures of the planes and you take recordings of the planes go by, right? So there's going to be a question on whether or not that restriction on your recording is constitutional. So then after you go through all of that and you determine if the policy is constitutional, then you have to look at, as applied to you, is there some sort of an exception for you? Like, was this a matter of public interest? Did you have a some sort of a reason, an excuse, did you get permission from someone to do it, etc.? So you've got to go through a lot of steps of the analysis before you can definitively say that you, in this instance, could not record there. Because there may be times, even in a non-public forum, where there is a prohibition against filming, where you might still be able to film based on, like, let's just say, for whatever reason, that you are in court and a fight breaks out and you whip out your phone to record that fight. Could the court come back and say that you violated the policy, and that you were wrong, and that, any attempts to stop you from recording violated your First Amendment right? Well, it depends on where you are. It depends on what circuit you're in. In some circuits, maybe. In the First Circuit, maybe they're going to say, well, yeah, you have a right to record police. It's this reasonable time, place, and manner restriction. And, as far as we're concerned, it was reasonable for you to do it. You have the right to do it, right? In other circuits, they might say no, like the 10th Circuit. They're like, no, that whole Glick thing, right to record public officials from engaging their public duties from a public place, that's only on traditional public forums. Everywhere else, it's off the table. So, go F yourself with this. So you've got to look at, it's complicated. That's all I'm saying. It's complicated. If some knucklehead is trying to tell you that there's some bright line rule, they're wrong. It's still, all of this is still getting fought out in the courts. There is no bright line rule. We're going to keep fighting about it for a long time to come until it makes its way up to the Supreme Court and we get all of the circuits kind of brought into line. And even then, there's always going to be the fringe cases and the fringe of the fringe cases that we're going to be fighting about. So I hope that makes sense. I'm not saying there is an unlimited right to record, but anybody who's dumb enough to say there is no right to record, you probably don't want to take legal advice from. That's it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.